Hi, folks. Before we get into this week's episode, I wanted to take a moment to address the United States Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade on June 24, a decision that has stripped away the right to have safe and legal abortion in the United States. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health and independence of all people, something we've already seen with abortion bans and restrictions in countries like Poland and Malta. This decision has dire consequences and can have harsh repercussions for other landmark decisions within the United States. We at IRCB encourage our audience, American and otherwise, to learn more about what you can do to help at choice.crd.co. I encourage you to speak up, take care, and spread the word. Now on to the show. This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week, the first base captain and star pitcher of the IRCB Little League team, Paul Jasley.
Hey there, humanoids.
And Kate Scotchless.
Hello.
I know the greatest joke I've ever pulled on this show is that we're a baseball team. But, you know, one day we're going to have jerseys and we're going to have jackets and all that kind of stuff. So we're getting there. Hopefully that's what I'll work on over the summer break. But speaking of the summer break, that's what's happening. After this week's episode, we are going on our yearly July month takeoff so everyone can go on vacation and we can get on our private jets and fly across the country and do all those special things we can't do because we have to record the show every week on Sunday. But for those of you who are sticking around and want to listen to more episodes of IRCB, we have got an incredible lineup coming. We're going to debut all of the first episodes, or some of the first episodes of the many Patreon series that we've released. I'm talking IRCB Movie Club, where it's me, Brian, and Paul talking about movies that are tangentially or adapted from comics. Me and Mike and Paul read Doom Patrol episode 1. This is where Paul and we talked all about Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, every single volume through thick and thin. There was even a two-parter in the middle of that series because of how big that run was. And then Giant Days of Our Lives, which is Brian, Kara, and Kate Lamphere, as they went through every single volume of Giant Days, and it's a wonderful series from start to finish. We've got some fantastic art for that one that you can go buy a t-shirt for if you haven't seen that yet, but it's a great series. If you read Giant Days, you're going to love it. And finally, the biggest series IRCB has ever recorded, and that is A Better Batmobile episode 1 featuring me and Paul. The whole series includes all of the various folks from IRCB, but the first episode is me and Paul, and this is going through Grant Morrison's run on Batman. Paul, you're here. Could you tell the folks at home a little bit more about that series?
Sure. Yeah. So Grant Morrison wrote Batman for about 7 or 8 years in the early 2000s. And it's one of my favorite Batman runs. Obviously, Morrison's one of my favorite comic book writers. So them writing Batman was right up my alley. It's kind of the book that got me back reading comics again regularly. So it's kind of an important series to me. And it's one of those runs that when I go back and revisit, I see a lot of thematic elements, recurring ideas and such in the series. So I kind of want to talk about it in depth with everybody on the show. It's really fun. Some people are rereading this stuff. Some people are reading it for the first time. And it's been a fun journey. Kate and I just recorded the most recent episode talking about the return of Bruce Wayne. It's great stuff. Even if you've not read the series, I think there's a lot there to unpack and enjoy. So, and if you want a summer reading project, there you go. You can read all of Grant Morrison's Batman along with us.
Yeah, that's the biggest sell right there. You need something to do this summer. Why not read all of Grant Morrison's Batman? So we're going to be dropping all of those on the feed. If you haven't listened to them, now you get some early access or instant access to these series that have been behind the big, massive paywall that we have, which actually isn't that massive. But yeah, if you like that kind of stuff, you can get all of that and so much more. We've got a ton of other stuff that's coming down the pipeline on our Patreon, but we want to give everyone a preview with everything that we've debuted so far. Oh, yeah, and if you want to get into that, it's $5 a month to get access to everything that we've done. We've got tons and tons of episodes of these various series. IRCB Movie Club, we just hit 10 episodes. Paul and Mike read Doom Patrol, I think was 8 or 9 episodes long. Yeah. Giant Days of Our Lives was 14 and a half episodes long. That's what we're going to call it. Better Batmobile is going to be 10 episodes long. Plus there's the Book versus Book series that we did way back in the day. The IRCB Star Wars series that we're doing, episode 2 is very close to coming out. Imagine if you could watch IRCB or Star Wars with the IRCB crew and maybe there was a video component. Who'd have thought something like that could ever exist? Maybe you'd be interested in that. Episode 2 is coming this July, and episode 3. I'm giving like full spoilers for everything that I'm dropping during the summer months, but we've got 2 more episodes of that coming out. The first 2 episodes of the Star Wars series, all of that for $5 a month. It's an incredible deal as far as I'm concerned. We put so much time and effort into that on top of this regular show. I think you're really, really going to dig it. The other thing I want to say, this is the longest intro for the show ever. After we get back from our summer break, this is going to be this is amazing. It's the first time it's happened in a very long time. We have 2 new people joining the IRCB crew. We have some fantastic voices you've heard on the show before. Paloma, who's been on an episode a little while back, 282, chock full of left turns. If you listen to that and you enjoyed Paloma's voice, she's going to be coming to the show. And Danny Martinez from the next issue pod is joining IRCB. We're going to have Danny and Paloma rotating in with the rest of the group, but it's going to be a fantastic thing. Danny, who was on the show for episode 268, How Do You Choose the Format to Read Your Comics? He also co-hosted the Candy Bar Antler Boy series. So everyone get on the Discord and tag him and celebrate him and Paloma for coming onto the show. It's going to be really, really fun once we get back from our summer break. But now that we're done with that, and I can take a breath finally, I have a question, 2 questions really to ask you too. Which is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kate.
I have been okay. Comic books have been incredible. I am so glad that we did this, like, what was your favorite thing that you read last year topic, because it got me to read 2 books that I never would have grabbed otherwise, or rather hadn't known to grab otherwise, that I have just loved so much. So I'm so excited to talk about that in the second half. And then I also grabbed Squire after hearing about it from you, Mike, on a different episode that it was coming out, and you were excited about it. This is the book by Sara Alfaji and Nadia Shamas, who both co-wrote it, and then Sara is the illustrator. And it's been so good. I am about 25% of the way through. This is a hefty OGN. Like, you could probably kill a rat with this thing if you swung it. So it's not a sit and read in one setting. It's sit and read it like a novel sort of situation. But I just love it so much so far. It has really beautiful, expressive artwork, and the story is reading like a Tamara Pierce novel, which is exactly what I was hoping for. The girl becoming a knight thing, the teenage girl against the odds. There's also the pull quote from Molly Knox Ostertag on the cover, which was the other big selling point for me. And yes, it is very similar to some of her work. Cannot recommend enough. So far, grain of salt. Maybe it takes a hard left turn in that 30% point, and then you can't blame me for that. But otherwise, did you read this yet, Mike?
I did, and I'm going to save my thoughts until you read it. I'm just going to say that.
Okay. For
good or for bad. That's all I'll say.
I also just finished reading The Return of Bruce Wayne for a Better Batmobile with Paul. The arc by Grant Morrison that's basically like Batman through time, and Batman fights cavemen, Batman fights Puritans and pirates. Oh my. And that was a blast to talk about and all that. So I'm really excited that people are going to get to sample these series. Also that I'm going to get to sample some of them, because I'll be real, I haven't actually listened to start of some of these, like the Saga one. So I think that'll be fun this summer.
Definitely. Yeah. I very much look forward to the episode that you both recorded. Listening to it, at least, because so far, it's been really interesting to hear how other people approach Batman with Paul at the center. Like, I'm telling you guys, the Better Batmobile is the most fun series we've recorded so far. And Saga of Saga and Giant Days of Our Lives were incredibly fun. So, like, I'm just saying, the bar has been raised.
I was gonna say, it was definitely a fun episode just because Paul and I are like polar Batman opposites, where I've read like 3 Batman books in my life, and they were all like Scott Snyder New 52 Batman. I think I read 3 or 4 of those. I don't remember which arc it is that it gets really boring, but in like half of the readership fell off, but I was in that half.
Oh no.
And so that's like my only experience with Batman.
I see.
So yeah, I was coming in and like missed almost all the references.
Well, yeah, that was pretty fun. I did think it was funny that you volunteered for that episode, because there was one of the episodes that had a number 1 in the reading list. I was like, it's not really the good jumping on point, you know.
DC told me it was fine.
They lied. But it does have Pilgrim Batman, who if that doesn't get you to read that book, I don't know what will. So
Pirate Batman, that's what would.
Oh, sure.
Oh, man. Now I'm very much looking forward to reading these comics to get caught up on the show. Oh, Paul, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
I'm doing well, Mike. West Michigan weather report for anyone that's curious, since Nick's not here. Today, it looks like it's about upper 70s and sunny here in Michigan, which is actually kind of a relief. We had some brutally hot 90-degree days recently, so a nice little summer reprieve here. It does feel like summertime here in West Michigan. And I've been slowly making my way through a giant stack of comics I picked up last time I was at the shop. 2 books that were on the top of my list I want to talk about here today. Oddly enough, were both horror stories, so I don't know, maybe that's the theme, especially considering the book I picked for the topic for today.
Yeah, you're in a very specific.
So the first one I want to talk. Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening with me, but I did read The Closet #1, written by James Tynion IV, art by Gavin Fullerton, colors by Chris O'Halloran, and letters by Tom Napolitano. Again, it's a horror comic written by James Tynion IV. They are so good at writing horror comics, and this first issue grabbed me right away. Such a simple story, but so creepy and effective. The story is basically about the main character, Tom, who's preparing to move his family, his wife, and their young child across the country. And is clearly stressing him out a little bit. The issue opens with him, instead of doing the tasks he needs to do to begin packing their stuff, he's like at a bar, sort of drowning his sorrows, worried about the trip a little bit. And then the issue sort of ends with him trying to comfort his son, who thinks there's a monster hiding in his closet in his room. And an idea is like, oh, we're going to move, so you don't have to worry about that. The monster's not going to follow you. And then I won't give away the ending, but I will say that the last couple pages of this book are legitimately creepy, legitimately disturbing. Somehow Tynion and Fullerton are able to pace it so expertly where it just, you get that existential dread, the creepiness of the setup of the story, and it just hooks you right away. It's basically paced like a perfect, horror movie. And yeah, I'm so excited to see where this series goes after this.
I will say that is definitely one of Tynion's biggest strengths for me is pacing. The creepy build up suspense mystery stuff without being so slow that you lose interest. Yeah, very well done.
You're making me not want to read this book, and I've been sitting on it for a couple weeks from his Substack. Damn it.
It's really, really good. It's well worth the read, but yeah, maybe read it in the middle of the day with all the lights on.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, Tynion is so good at just giving you just enough information to tell you the story. It's not a ton of exposition, but that suits the creepy vibe of the story. So it's so well done. Speaking of perfect comics, I also read That Texas Blood #14. It's written by Chris Condon and art by Jacob Phillips. I love this series so much. It just somehow gets better and better. Issue 14 begins a new story arc that's set in 1992 in Ambrose County, where the series takes place. And it's wintertime there in Texas. And wherever they are in Texas, they're going to get a big winter storm. So that's sort of looming over the story, this big storm that's going to come, possibly shut down all the power in the town. At the same time, we get hints that a serial killer is on the loose. The opening, as opposed to the last issue where the closing pages were creepy, this issue opens up with one of the scariest sort of slasher flick type openings I've ever seen, with some really creepy, disturbing artwork from Phillips. You don't usually see him do that type of stuff, but it's not graphic, but it is unsettling. It reminds me of a 90s or late 80s slasher flick. And the story from there has some sort of season 1 True Detective vibes to it, due to that sort of ritualistic serial killer vibe. And then there's really tense local election that's going to take place, and the sheriff, Joe Bob Coates, who's kind of the main character of this whole series, he's dealing with a lot of personal stuff. It's a very tense comic, but again, the pacing is so well done. It just draws you right in from that first opening scene. It feels like just such a well-paced horror story. I love this series overall, and I'm so excited that this new story arc is starting off with a bang, or a big slash, I guess. I won't tell you exactly what happens, but it's such a good series. If you're not reading That Texas Blood, you really should check it out. I think it's such a good story, such a good series, and this first issue of this new story arc might be a good place to jump in if you are curious.
Yeah, I've been sitting on the first volume of this for a while. I'm very curious as to how Jacob Phillips is able to pump out 2 different books right now at once. As an artist, I mean, honestly, he's working on this and Newburn. How is that possible? But you know what? That's fine. I'll let him do whatever he needs to. More Jacob Phillips art in my life is not a bad thing.
Absolutely. I totally agree. This series is kind of nice because they do take a few months off between story arcs. So it's been gone for a few months. It's good to have it back. Okay. So that gives him some breathing room in terms of turning that stuff around. So
that's cool. Well, for me, I am going through a midlife crisis, it seems. I decided to shave off my beard. And I mean, I should say it's not really what's happening, but more like I did decide to try to go for like a really cool look, and so I've got that 5 o'clock shadow with a mustache thing going on. It's the first time I've seen my face like this in 8 or 9 years. So every time I look in the mirror, I think that someone is trying to kill me, but it turns out it's just me, and maybe that's the case. But still, so I did that, and that was really interesting. And then I went through, I've been walking around in New York the last couple of days just because I had went in for work, and then I went to go see some family that came to town. And I went into Forbidden Planet because I was in that area, and I picked up a couple different books. Specifically, one of those books was Clementine Book 1. This is the new Tilly Walden book that came out. But before I talk about that, I do want to talk about Dragon Ball Super number 85. If you're not reading Dragon Ball Super, that's okay. I'm not going to say anything that Dragon Ball fans don't already know, and that you as a person who doesn't read Dragon Ball shouldn't already understand. And the fact that this is written by Akira Toriyama or the art by Toyotaru. Dragon Ball is back to doing big fight time, and they've been doing it for a while. We've been in the middle of this giant fight. We've gotten to see Goku and Vegeta master new powers that they debuted as part of this giant fight, and of course the enemy has found a way to surpass them, even though they are supposed to be the most powerful fighting styles in the universe, and in multiple dimensions, right? Because that's where we are in terms of power creep with Dragon Ball. And then of course at the end of this most recent issue, Goku and Vegeta found ways to up those powers and truly mastered them in ways that they never thought they could. And then the last page of the issue is the bad guy transforming into a more powerful version of themselves. This is so stupid, and it is every single shonen trope that you hate to hear about, and yet I eat it up like a bag of kettle corn. It's bad for me. I shouldn't do it. My dentist said that I need to stop, and yet here I am just loving it from beginning to end. So this is so perfectly Dragon Ball. I love it. If you haven't read No One Left to Fight, I highly recommend you go read that Aubrey Sitterson comic, because Aubrey Sitterson encapsulates everything that makes Dragon Ball great to me and adds a layer of depth that Dragon Ball just doesn't have. But if you want like a small sum up of what it feels like when I'm reading Dragon Ball, that book totally nails it. And you don't have to read like 20 years worth of manga. So, man, I freaking love Dragon Ball. Anyways, yeah, Kate, I'm not saying that Dragon Ball isn't deep. I'm reading the chat right now in Discord, which if you're not on Discord, you should be doing that. Dragon Ball is not deep. It is the most surface level, like 2 inches of kiddie pool storytelling ever, and I love it to death. But anyways, let me talk about a book that actually has some depth and was pretty okay. And that is Clementine Book 1. This is by Tilly Walden with colors/grays, I guess, by Cliff Rathburn of Walking Dead. Somehow I forgot that this was a comic about zombies set in the world of Walking Dead when I picked it up. I knew that as soon as I got home, and I said, oh yeah, this is a zombie book that's in the Walking Dead universe. I'm as a comic book fan, as someone who was very, very, very into the Walking Dead, very much over the Walking Dead. I was over it when the comic was still coming out. I was over it after I watched the first 3 seasons of the TV show. I was over it after I watched the first season of Fear the Walking Dead. But I keep coming back to it. If you can hear that thing that is not being said in my statements there, I keep coming back to The Walking Dead, even though I'm sick of it. Here I am yet again, coming back to The Walking Dead. Because one, it's Tilly Walden, right? How do you not pick up the next Tilly Walden book? Yeah,
exactly.
But at the same time, it's the same stuff that you get out of The Walking Dead, right? There's a really bad world. There's zombies. Everything's in black and white. People just are depressed and really numb to the idea of death. There's no point to anyone living, and yet they continue to try. And so this story follows this girl Clementine as who has an amputated leg, walking through the world. She's just trying to go north. We really don't know what her story is at the beginning, and we don't truly find out all of it even by the end of this book, because this is book 1 of 3, it seems. But yeah, like 235 pages of zombie dystopian slice of life with a cliffhanger, but feels one and done, is pretty impressive in a world like Walking Dead, where I feel like the precedent for the story is that these stories go on and on and on with whoever survives. And while that is the case kind of for Clementine, this book feels strangely hopeful compared to what I've read in The Walking Dead, which is in the most dire of situations, humans will become the biggest monsters, worse than zombies trying to eat your skin.
Right.
And that really isn't the case in this book, and I kind of appreciated it for that. Like, the book is dire, the book is extremely depressing, the book makes you feel like shit because you feel like these people have no hope. Why am I reading a story about the fact that there's no way for these people to survive? Mm-hmm. And yet, getting through the whole book, I did feel like there was a glimmer of something at the end, and I appreciated that. So I don't know. If you're looking for something that's depressing, this is a good book, I guess.
Yeah, for me, I'm definitely reading it because of Tilly Walden. And I'm definitely getting it on Hoopla, which it's already on for those of you who use Hoopla. It's already available because it's Walking Dead. I'm not paying money for this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I like got a third of the way into the book and I was like, okay, maybe Tilly Walden's going to like flip the script on things a little bit and kind of tell a different story. And to her credit, I think she does tell a more interesting story than I think what happened in The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's a strategy or like a book that's about survival against the zombies and against humans. It truly feels like a book about people who are just trying to survive the worst things ever. And there is this glimmer of hope in everything that they do, in that if we can just get through this thing, we actually can survive, because they put themselves in a situation where there are no zombies. Now, no spoilers, but like, zombies are a part of the story, but like, that is not the interesting part of it. Like oh no, suddenly there are zombies, and it doesn't even feel like a Negan situation, right, where there's just someone with a fucking barbed wire bat trying to bash people's head in just to try to prove a point, right? The twist in this book, I think, is really interesting, and I don't know, it's not a bad book, but if you're sick of Walking Dead and you think you're going to get something completely different, that is not the case. This is still a Walking Dead story. It just has a different silver lining than maybe other zombie stories.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that I'm not hating on Walking Dead. I read many volumes of the comic and watched many seasons of the show and loved it. It's just like you're saying, I hit a threshold where there was a certain point where I had my fill of that world and that storyline. Especially when it got so depressing about humans being the real monsters. So it was just like, oh, okay, we get it. People suck.
I know, right? I know. So yeah, the only downside of this book is, I will warn you, the next book isn't coming out until 2023, because obviously it takes time to put together a 235 page of story. But Tilly Walden's art is fantastic from start to finish. So at least you'll have that, and you can always go back and reread it. But anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about comic books that are coming out in the near future. Let's talk about comics that are on the top of our pile, new, old, whatever you want it to be. Let's kick things back over to you, Paul. What are you looking forward to next?
I am looking forward to Batman Catwoman number 12. This is the final issue of the maxi series written by Tom King with art by Clay Mann, colors by Tomeu Morey. And this is it, gang. The big wedding issue, the big finale. Batman and Catwoman are getting married, and I'm assuming their big day will go off without a hitch, right? It'll go perfectly as planned, right? No one will interfere. It'll be a wonderful day that everyone can celebrate. This is again, it's Tom King writing Batman. It's kind of like the story that he was setting up in his Batman run, but then he decided to leave the series, and then they spun the story off into this series. It's kind of confusing why they made this a separate series, honestly, but I really enjoyed this overall. It is one of these books that I do think I need to go back and reread in one sitting to really sort of to fully enjoy and appreciate, because Tom King has been doing this, basically running 3 parallel timelines in this story, where you have, the young Selena Kyle sort of determining whether or not she wants to continue to be a criminal or kind of, turn her life around, going back and forth on that, the morals of what she's doing. You have her meeting Batman and that relationship. And then there's a future storyline where after Batman's dead, she's trying to get revenge on the Joker for what he did. And I feel like those 3 storylines, we see them in each issue, but to go back and reread it, kind of piece all together might be fun. But overall, it's a great series. Again, Tom King kind of gets Batman pretty well. And Clay Mann is just such an amazing artist that it's a fun series. So now it's finally done. Maybe if you haven't read it yet, it might be time to finally make that plunge and think about what you're going to get Bruce and Selena as a wedding gift. I still haven't picked it out. I didn't check the registry, but I guess I'll have to do that.
Well, I mean, what do you get the man that has everything, right?
Exactly.
It's funny that you bring this up because I totally forgot about this series. I thought it was done. Honestly, I thought it was 6 issues over and done.
Yeah.
When I was unpacking all of my comics, I did find the quote unquote wedding invitation that they gave out to different comic shops. I'm pretty sure I threw it away, but I was like, what a stupid thing that DC did. But also, I kind of love it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's been any number of comic book weddings, and it's always so dumb and gimmicky because it's like, it can't just be a happy day. They have to build it up, and then it might not go right, because they did build it up for issue 50 of Batman when Tom King was writing Batman, and of course it didn't happen, right? So then this series actually get to see it happen. Make a note of that for a future episode. Favorite comic book weddings. We'll have to do a whole episode about that. That might be fun.
Yeah, it'll be Fantastic Four, the one with North Star and his partner, and this one. That's what it'll be.
Perfect.
Cool. Okay, what about you? What are you looking forward to reading next?
Well, I'm going to finish up Squire. It's due at the library on Tuesday, so I got to spend tonight and tomorrow plowing through the rest of these chapters. But then, talking about our favorite comics from last year made me realize that I have slept on reading the sequel / companion. It's described as sequel or versus and companion in various places. So I'm not sure if this is actually a parallel novel versus a sequel. But Class Act by Jerry Craft is that to New Kid, which we're going to talk about in the second half. And I still haven't actually read it, which is crazy because I really love New Kid. This one focuses on Jordan's friend Drew, who's the main character of this one, who's the other student of color at their prestigious prep school that's like all white kids. Mm-hmm. It's similar themes. It's about, he's worried that even if he works 10 times as hard, that he still won't be afforded the same opportunities as his like really privileged classmates at this private school. And they develop a kind of rift in their friend group as he figures out that his good friend Liam is one of these privileged kids, or maybe. And so they have to work together to like figure out how to all accept one another, but also ultimately it's about Drew figuring out how to accept himself and all that. So this is middle grade. So it's all about, friendship and finding your place in the world and, learning how the world works and stuff like that. I know it's coming as a surprise that I would be interested in reading a middle grade book. But you know what? We're 2 years, 3 years almost now going strong of me just sticking to the feel goods. So, sure. And I'm okay with that, especially after reading some really creepy stuff for this episode. So it also just happens to be what I can pick up in physical. It seems like so I'm back staying with my parents again for the rest of the summer. And so I'm at a different library system. But just like my home library system, if you want to read books in physical versus on Hoopla, what they actually have in physical is a lot more middle grade books like this. Which gotcha. I like because I am working from home on a computer screen all day. So looking at my iPad to read comics is not ideal as a restful thing to do after that all day. So that's part of the equation as well. But I'm looking forward to this a lot.
Cool. Well, I might have to check that out as well. I didn't realize there was a sequel. But we'll talk more about that in the second half. Specifically the book that was preceded this one. But for me, I guess before I get into my picks, I should talk about the folks that are hanging out with us on Discord today who have sent over their top of their pile picks. And Danny's reading the variants from Marvel Comics, variants number 1, I should say. Hugh is reading Sabretooth number 4, and Gray is reading Brink by Dan Abnett and Ian J. Colbert. Can't say I've heard of the last one, but Dan Abnett, I mean, can't go wrong there. I've read a lot of his books and they're pretty solid. For me, though, I am interested in reading a book that I picked up very recently, The Con Artist. This is written and drawn by Luke Healy. I was at Forbidden Planet on Thursday when I was in Manhattan, just because, of course, you got to go to the comic shop when you're in New York City. And I know that I'm a fancy boy because I get to go to Manhattan Forbidden Planet. But I saw this on the shelf, and like the tagline for the book sold me, which is a quintessentially millennial tale about friendship and the quest for self-actualization, which feels super heavy and exactly the kind of thing I need to bring me down right here in this nice beautiful summer weather. Like I feel like Luke Healy wrote this book and is coming directly at me. So I'm really excited to read it. Healy's art looks really good and the premise sounds fun enough. I mean, fun in heavy quotes there. This is going to be Frank's year. He's going to do it all, find love, become a famous comedian, and responsibly parent his plants. But then Giorgio gets hit by a bus. Self-assured and utterly entitled, Giorgio has always seemed like Frank, but better. Moving in with and caring for his estranged childhood friend quickly starts to chip away at Frank's sense of self, as well as Giorgio's carefully curated online persona. Is Giorgio's penchant for overindulgence truly aspirational, or is it ultimately a red flag? The further Frank is pulled into Giorgio's orbit, the quicker his existential dread blooms. Expectation and reality soon collide in a singular tale about trust and confidence, and boy, oh boy, this sounds fun to read.
This is going to pair perfectly with your midlife crisis. I bet you halfway through this book, you lose the mustache.
I'll finally have hit it.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, the hardback edition of this book is fantastic. The design, it's really well put together. It feels really sturdy. I love a high quality hardback copy of a comic. And this is from Drawn and Quarterly, so I'm not really surprised there. It's like them and Fantagraphics really put a lot of effort into making sure their physical comics are super duper solid, and this one is no different. So I just love the idea of finding random comics at the comic shop, and Drawn and Quarterly and Fantagraphics are always those publishers that I find a thing where I'm like, there's no way in hell I would have ever found this if it wasn't just randomly on a shelf somewhere. So I'm looking forward to reading this, even if it's going to probably be a little bit depressing. But yeah, I guess we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about our Goodreads Book of the Month theme, which was your favorite comics that you read from 2021. Paul, Kate, and I all picked books that we thought were great. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the books that people on the Goodreads group read as well. So we'll be back in just a second. This week on I Read Comic Books, we are talking about our favorite comics we read in 2021. If you haven't checked out our Goodreads group, that's what the theme was for this month. We wanted everybody to just post the books that they loved that they read in 2021, because sometimes it's nice to revisit books, and it's also nice to recommend some of your favorites to people. I was reading through the thread just before we got into here, and honestly, there are so many banger comics in that list. Like, if you're looking for something good to read, please check out the link in the show notes. You will find something that you love. I am absolutely certain of it, because I've read a lot of the books that are in there. I've added a lot of the books that are people recommended to my list, because one, the people in our Goodreads group have exquisite taste and they are amazing human beings. And two, given the stuff that I already know that's in there that I've read, like all the other recommendations people gave, I know are going to be good, because multiple people gave multiple recommendations. And as much as they're breaking the rules and I can't stand it, I appreciate it, because I know these people have good taste. So I'm definitely going to read their recommendations. So let's get into things. Kate, Paul, and myself, we all picked out a book that we really loved that we read last year. So for the show, we're gonna try not to get into too much spoiler territory for today, because we do want you to go read these books and we don't want you to be spoiled if you haven't read them already. Today we're going to be talking about Fangs by Sara Anderson, The Nice House on the Lake Volume 1 by James Tynion, Alvaro, Martinez, Bueno, and Jordie Bellaire, and New Kid by Jerry Craft. So I guess we're going to try a new format for these types of episodes and see how it works. Give us a shout if you liked it or if you didn't like it, or, if you just want to say hi, and, send us an email at ircbpodcast@gmail.com. But we're going to go through our top 3 points of each book and kind of just bounce around from there. So to start things off, let's talk about The Nice House on the Lake. This was Paul's pick. A quick summary for those of you that don't know. Everyone who is invited to the house knows Walter well. They know him a little anyway. Some met him in childhood, some met him months ago, and Walter's always been a little off. But after the hardest year of their lives, nobody was going to turn down Walter's invitation to an astonishingly beautiful house in the woods, overlooking an enormous sylvan lake. It's beautiful, it's opulent, it's private, so a week of putting up with Walter's weird little schemes and nicknames in exchange for the vacation of a lifetime, why not? And then the book gets really fucking dark and crazy. So I guess to get started, Paul, why did you pick this book? Why was this your favorite book from 2021?
It's funny. I was trying to rack my brain about all the comics I read last year, and some that, there's a few that I had swimming around in my brain to suggest for this episode. But this was one that I felt, was maybe one I didn't talk about on the show too much already about. And then also one that was easy to find on Hoopla for people to read. As I discussed earlier, James Tynion IV is basically mastered the comic book pacing of telling a horror story, and that's what this book is. It's creepy as hell. There's this slow unease, existential dread that creeps into the story. as it goes on. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a point where you really question, does Walter invite all these people, these 12 people, to the house to sort of save them from something, or are they trapped there and they're trying to decide that themselves? On top of all that, the artwork is so lovely. I mean, Bueno's line work has a sort of painterly quality. It's almost like brushwork throughout the book.
Yeah.
And then Jordie Bellaire's colors just pop off the page. It's one of the best looking books I've been reading. And so the first volume has the first 6 issues. And I'll tell you, issue 9 is the most recent one that came out. This story just gets bigger and weirder and better as it goes. So if you enjoyed the first volume, definitely keep going with that series.
Yeah, I guess to dig into things, Kate, what was the first point that you thought of? What's your first highlight of this book?
So the artwork stood out immediately to me too, that the painterly style, but I thought the way that Bueno's pencils make it feel like both real and surreal at the same time fits the story so perfectly. I also deeply appreciate, because of how big the cast of characters are, there's like quite a few, I didn't count, but like at least like 10 friends staying at this house. You can actually tell the characters apart even when they're changing clothes day to day, which is huge with this size cast. But also the art is mixed with other like artifacts, so to speak. So you get some like emails, and you get like recording transcripts typed out and stuff like that, which works so well. And it's just chef kiss all around. And yes, Jordie Bellaire colors are so perfect and add to that surreal, realistic yet surreal feeling at the same time. And you're like going back and forth in time as these characters, each issue a different one is sort of telling what happened from the future, but then you're bouncing back to it happening in the present. So and the art really helps with distinguishing that, and the colors specifically help with distinguishing where you are, whether it's the character now in the present day versus showing you what happened in the past. So in terms of one of those books that could have been extremely confusing with the wrong artwork, not only is it beautiful artwork, but it also really helps tell the story in a way that it could have been really hurt by less distinct character to character and jumping around in time and stuff from someone else. So that was the big thing for me.
Yeah, this book scares the hell out of me because of Bueno's art, right? Like, I think there is a level of realism that is still also able to be not real at the same time. Like, some of the creepier elements of this book are extremely highlighted by Bueno's art. And I think if you had given this to, any other traditional like Marvel or DC artist, like, it wouldn't have felt as scary. I think Bueno brings a level of realism to this book that when you feel like it's real, you go, wow, this is beautiful. And then when he adds something surreal to the world, you feel terrified because it feels like it could exist. And to me, like, there are some moments in this book that are super scary because of how things change on a dime, panel to panel, and it terrifies me.
Yeah, very much so. And then like even the things that are realistic that you're seeing that are happening in the world that are horrifying images depicted realistically, and you're like, oh shit, it just hits you in the face.
Paul, did you have, I guess, what were your highlights beyond this? I don't know if you were in the same boat or what.
For the book that I picked to discuss, I really enjoyed it, Mike.
Yeah.
No.
Well, sorry, I guess, like, I don't know if you had any points beyond like the ones that you already made.
I feel like I definitely want to stress again how much the artwork helps elevate the story. If it's someone else doing the artwork, I don't know if it'd be nearly as effective. There is that sort of unease that creeps through the artwork just based on the style that Bueno uses. And I will say, I think, if you read this in trade, it's maybe a more satisfying read, but I really like the way that Tynion paces each issue, like, because I'm reading it month to month, and it's like as soon as that new issue drops, that's the first thing I read. You know what I mean? There's some cliffhangers. I think issue 7 specifically, I remember being like, oh my God, he did that now? Like, there's such a twist to each issue that is both maddening, and it just makes you want to read it as soon as it drops. So as soon as I get my hands on the new copy, like, that's one of the first things I read each time it comes out.
That's a good point.
It's really compelling.
That maybe that would actually make it a good single versus bad. I was thinking like, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm reading this in trade because it's such a page turner. And I would they need the next issue immediately, please.
Yeah, I think it is, scheduled as a 12-issue series, I believe. So yeah, issue 9 is the most recent. So yeah, that second volume should be dropping before the end of the year, I'd guess. So you'll get your fix
Fingers
sooner
crossed.
than later.
Yeah. My first point was that this book, like the first issue, if it doesn't terrify you, get the hell out of here, right? I don't care who you are. I have never felt so anxious and so overwhelmed by a first issue of a comic. Like I was super drawn into the story, trying to really focus on understanding all 12 of the characters, because it is a lot, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm gonna go through my first and my second points here at once, because I think we've already started to touch on them. But like this first issue really smacked me in the face in terms of unexpected twists, right? Something odd is going on in the first issue, and the big reveal at the end of that first issue slayed me. Like I had to put the book down and do like breathing exercises. Like I was freaking the hell out for a book like this to come out in the middle of like this global pandemic that we have. Like, who does Tynion think he is doing this to me? I feel personally attacked. Like he went after my anxiety in ways that I didn't think were possible. And I appreciate that. Like I will recommend that first issue alone is like, if this can't get you into something that isn't a superhero comic, I don't know what will, because it's terrifying. Bueno's art really draws you in. Like, again, going back to what I was saying before, that realism mixed with surrealism happens throughout that first issue and throughout the rest of the volume is astonishing. And it scares the hell out of me. And I really love that. And with that being the like amping the story up to 11 in the first issue, and then seeing the fallout as the series continues is unfucking believable, right? The second part of that is, because there's so much to take in, this book absolutely sucks to read month to month personally. I like no shame to Alvaro Martinez Bueno, but I sometimes have an issue telling people apart. Like some of the women I feel like are drawn very samey sometimes, and again, that might just be me not having a good distinct picture of everyone in the story, and just being a bad comic reader. But I feel like some of the plot lines and some of the characters and their relationships are hard to keep track of. Like I need a yarn board, especially with the we're calling them data pages, guys, not prose pages, data pages. Where there is like just transcripts and different things like that. I'm making it, being a jerk about that, but still, some of that stuff is just for me hard to follow, and I think a reread of the series, of just reading it all in one go, might actually solidify things as I'm in the second half of the story. But yeah, I
especially
still love
the women
book.
piece. I think the women piece will help you a lot to read it all at once, because I think they're similar-ish if you're not getting them all back to back all the time, because often an issue will only have a couple of the women in it, and so you're not seeing them side by side a bunch. But when you're reading straight through, they've been pretty clear and consistent.
Yeah. And I think for me, like, this book probably just warrants a reread. So I really can't say, like, this complaint that I have is like a really minor one, because at this point, who's going to go and wait a month between reading issues if you can just get the volume? But I will say, like, I think this book probably, even with the reveals, probably is worth, reading in succession, if only because you're going to get those reveals and everything's going to turn around. I can't wait to reread this book is basically what it comes down to. Like, I think I'm going to do a full reread of the series when I get the second volume, even though I'm reading it month to month. Kate, what was your second point? What was the next highlight you had, or low light, whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, it goes into the story is just super compelling. It's way too page turnery for me to have been able to tolerate reading in singles. So I'm very glad I have the trade. That said, this is so good that it's one of those series, knowing that it now from Paul that it's a maxi, that I'm like, oh man, I wish I had I would love to have these in single issues as like a collector item, So that's a little disappointing, but I bet they'll come out with well, it's DC, so it'll also be priced like freaking gold, but the whole maxi in one hardcover or something, I bet they'll come out with something nice. But they do love to stab you in the wallet, so we'll see. But just Tynion is so good at writing mysteries like this, with just the really good slow burn pacing that isn't so slow that you don't feel like you're getting any payoff issue to issue, where like it's the steady drip, drip, drip. You know what I mean? Like, and then the big hits to the face sometimes that are so good. Just the mystery. And it's not just the mystery around what's happening out in the world, but also the mystery of some of the things around this lake house, like these weird statues and what all is on this property and why. And like, you're figuring it out with the characters, you know, but also, and then also the mystery of like, who even is Walter and why did he do this? Was he doing it as the good thing or a bad thing? Like just these, it's just
man.
So compelling. So if anyone is in a reading slump, like where you're having a hard time sitting and concentrating, which I know is very common these days. I've certainly have found myself in that place multiple times in the pandemic. This is a perfect book to pick up to get out of a slump like that, because it will keep you glued.
Yeah, Kate, you're going to have to let us know when you finish this volume, because I want to know how you feel about that last page, that last issue, man.
Yeah,
you're going to have to let us know.
Absolutely, dude. Oh my God.
Am I going to be mad at you guys? Is it a big, huge cliffhanger for the next volume?
No. Well,
okay.
No, the twist is
yes and no.
Great. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I guess my third point for this one is like, this is probably the most like anticipated book that I get every month. I think it's between this and anything that Cy Spurrier's doing, just because that's just who I am. And the Department of Truth. Like, let's be honest. Like, my top books right now are just James Tynion books. Like, Tynion. I think we're supposed to say Tynion. I don't know. Okay, everybody.
Oh, really?
But I don't know. But yeah, I really have to credit Tynion, I guess, for finding a fun, like, insane reason to trap 12 people together and drive them insane without it feeling like torture porn. You know, to go back to my talk about, you know, talking about Walking Dead, like, that book feels torturous in the way that it's written sometimes. Like, these people are really stretched to the brink, and it's insane to watch them, and you feel, I don't know, I always felt like tired near the end of reading Walking Dead, whereas this book, the mystery of it feels like there's compassion at the center of it. Yeah. And you don't really know what Walter's true motives are. I mean, we start to find out as the book goes on, but like really in the first couple of issues, even like you don't know what his motives are, but it seems to be from a place of love and compassion and care, given the way that Tynion is telling the story about Walter's relationships with each of the characters that are in the story. So I this book feels really like real and awful all at once without feeling it's like Tynion's just trying to show you how fucking evil someone can be, you know?
Well,
I do appreciate that about this book.
I think one of the other big differences for me from Walking Dead is that there's a really interesting differences in the way the different characters trapped in this situation or saved in this situation, depending on your point of view, approach it and deal with the trauma of it, deal with like how they're going to address the situation, what they're going to do, their feelings. Are they holding it in? Are they having outbursts? What do they want? Like all these different approaches to what's happening to them in their lives. Whereas in Walking Dead, there's a very like sameness of all of these characters, more or less. There's a slight difference in the ones who are trying to like basically take charge versus the ones folks who are more followers. But there's not such a distinct approach of like how different personalities and different types of people with their different backgrounds would approach a major crisis like this. At least to my memory. I will say I have not watched or read Walking Dead in several years now. So apologies if you're sitting there screaming at your, speaker going, oh my God, they're totally different. What are you talking about? But to my memory, there was pretty much the two camps: people who were trying to like take power in the new zombie world, and the people who were just trying to like not get at,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, no. So I mean, Paul, great pick. Obviously, I think we all hear. This is the thing. This is my favorite kind of episode to do because like we all picked amazing comics for this. Yeah. I even say that about my own because I loved it. But yeah, I guess let's move on. We need to eventually get through things. So, Kate, let's talk about your book. You picked New Kid by Jerry Craft. If you want, you can. I'll read the synopsis. That's just how we're going to do things, I guess. 7th grader Jordan Banks loves nothing more than drawing cartoons about his life, but instead of sending him to the art school of his dreams, his parents enroll him in a prestigious private school known for its academics, where Jordan is one of the few kids of color in his entire grade. As he makes the daily trip from his Washington Heights apartment to the upscale Riverdale Academy Day School, Jordan soon finds himself torn between two worlds and not really fitting into either one. Can Jordan learn to navigate his new school culture while keeping his neighborhood friends and staying true to himself? Man, what a book, Kate. I love it. I'm so glad that you picked a middle grade. Not that I didn't expect you to pick a middle grade, but I had never heard of this book before, and I thought it was a really fun read. But before I get into my thoughts, Paul, what did you think of this book? What were your first thoughts in reading this?
Yeah, like you said, Mike, this is kind of out of my wheelhouse. I don't read a lot of these types of books that are aimed at young adult readers, at least like, of this tone. So I appreciated having something that I would not have picked up normally. And the one thing that really stood out to me was the way Kraft injects a sort of like imagination into the Jordan as the main character. So like you get in each sort of, the book's broken up into chapters, and each chapter has like a title page basically, and it's a pop culture reference. It kind of like, I really appreciate that. It's very fun in that regard. And then when you get Jordan's sketchbook that he's drawing his little cartoons in, the way that's illustrated, it really gives you a better sense of the character in a way. So I really enjoyed the way Kraft played with form and played with style to kind of give you a better sense of Jordan as a main character. I did appreciate that quite a bit.
Very similar to Raina Telgemeier, where she's telling Telgemeier's explicitly, memoir comics for a lot of hers, but where she as a child is doing a lot of cartooning. I mean, that's, Kraft is sharing his own experiences as a kid. So of course it's a little kid who's going to do a bunch of cartoons and stuff. But I really like that about this book too. And I will say, I think it'd be appropriate for young adults, but I think this is pretty squarely a middle grade book. This one is the first graphic novel to ever win the Newbery Medal, which is explicitly a children's literature award. So not the teenage audience. So this is the target demo, I think, is like the 10 to 12 gang.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Which is part of why it's pretty on the nose. You're not going to have trouble understanding the message in this book, right? But it's just so good. I am a firm believer in that a good story is a good story, regardless of what age it's written for. This falls squarely into that camp for me.
Yeah, it sounds like we all kind of had like the same point about this book, in that there is a bluntness to the storytelling. And I felt like that was genuine, right? Like it wasn't just because, this is for younger audiences. Like I found it to be almost endearing that Jordan's dad was having this conversation that had these undertones of like, how was it? Asking the question, not did you enjoy school, but like, as the only person of color, how many kids of color were there at this school? Like, did you feel uncomfortable because of that? Like having those, like, in my opinion, kind of hard conversations with a kid is really like nice to see in a comic like this, to know that like Kraft is telling a story about parents who are willing to have these conversations that are affecting these kids' lives every day, whether they know it or not. And making sure that they're aware that like, you need to be aware of this stuff because you are quote unquote different than the homogenous school that you're going to, and people are going to therefore treat you differently because of that. Right. And it's important for you to take note of that and push back against that. And throughout the story, I think Jordan has struggles with that a lot, like how to deal with those types of situations. Whereas some of the people he meets at his school, like his friend Drew, who is also a kid of color, doesn't, and really pushes back in a way that quote people don't quote unquote like, because he's being an outspoken kid who is pushing back and like, why are you calling me a different name? Why are you treating me different because of the color of my skin? Or, things like that. And I'm like, for a book that's aimed at, like you said, Kate, like 10 to 12-year-olds, like these are some pretty heavy subjects, but maybe they're not. Maybe me as a white kid is like, well, you can't talk about that with children because it's too much. But like, this is affecting their day-to-day life. And I love that Kraft brought this up in such an obvious way. Yeah. And he brought it up in such an obvious way that like, the kids, like, they should be aware of this, and to hand this to a kid who would read this to go, oh, this is like part of my life. And I don't know, I found that to be both, like I said, blunt and genuine at the same time.
Yeah. And I think it's accessible for, I mean, like I of course think about with books like this, like how I would have taken it as a kid. And like, what kid hasn't struggled with feeling different than other kids in middle school, right? Like there's a level of empathizing that I think the way he's put the story together, like any kid can relate to in a way that is really helpful for putting yourself in the character's shoes, so that the message and the kind of lesson can get heard and internalized and understood. Like this would have made me a better 11-year-old white kid. You know what I mean?
Sure, definitely.
Yeah, I think the sort of bluntness and on the noseness of the dialogue, I mean, it's definitely designed, I think, to give voice to the feelings that maybe a kid reading this would have. You know what I mean? To actually have the characters state explicitly out loud, this is how I'm feeling. Like that definitely helps kids navigate with their own emotions. So yeah, I think it's well written in that regard. I will have to say, the teachers are really rude. Some of those teachers, I couldn't believe what they were saying. I was like, oh my God, you're going to say that to that kid? So it's a little bit about,
Yeah, that was some of it. I was like, okay, like, I don't know. In my mind, I'm like, there's no way that a teacher like intentionally gets two like black kids mixed up like for a whole year. And like, and yet like, I have a feeling that Kraft is telling this story from a world of experience, right?
Exactly.
Like,
exactly.
Some of this stuff is like so strange, it has to be true. Like, you can't make this kind of stuff up storytelling. That's, oh man, that really rubbed me the wrong way.
The tag, right? It says it's perfect for fans of Raina Telgemeier and Jean Lun Yang, who did American Born Chinese, which... What do you guys think about that? Like, I have only read Raina Telgemeier, but at least in terms of that, I think that is spot on in terms of if you liked Raina Telgemeier books, that this would be a good book to pick up. And I think you've read American Born Chinese, haven't you, Mike?
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that, because in my mind, Raina Telgemeier is on one end of the spectrum of like, I don't know, like easier stories to digest, whereas Jean Yuen Yang, his comic is like way more in your face about the like racial issues that Asian Americans face, right? Like, especially in that book, he's very like, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm not going to soften up any of this. I'm going to talk about it, and it's going to be harsh. Whereas I think this book sits right in the middle of that, where I think Kraft does a great job of talking about the issues that are faced by kids of color without really, I don't know, I don't want to say softening it, but he doesn't spend the whole book making the whole book like about Jordan's struggle with race in school. Like, Jordan has many things that he struggles with throughout school, and race is a part of that. And whereas Raina Telgemeier, I think, does a good job of like talking about the issues that she struggled with as a kid. I've only read like her one book that she did, like the book about teeth, right?
Smile. Yeah. So a couple of them are about her health problems as a kid. So Guts is about IBS and panic, like anxiety disorder, but specifically a phobia. Gotcha. And then Smile is about the really significant trauma to her front teeth and all the orthodontic and surgical stuff that went with that.
Yeah.
And then the other ones are much more focused around like friend group drama.
Yeah. And so I think Telgemeier, I mean, like, again, all three of those creators, amazing work, right? Like, I've loved all of those books. I feel like Telgemeier's approach is a little bit more friendly in maybe that's just because the subject matter is a little bit easier to approach, right? And again, I'm sitting here as a white guy, like, really like uncomfortable with talking about race in general, just because like I don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. But like, I feel like this book sits right in the middle of those three, and I definitely would say, like, if you like those other two, this book would work. Like, that's definitely the case. That's the short answer here. Well, yeah, I guess like my third point for this book was that the chapter openings were dumb and fun, and I just thought that was cool. Like, each chapter had like a pop culture reference that like was clearly something that like Jordan had drawn or something, which the throwbacks and the constant drawings of Jordan's inside the book really made this book fun and like really laughable, or not laughable, like it was very funny to me, like throughout the whole thing, to see his thing, his interpretation of the scene. I love that Kraft tried to really take a 12-year-old is telling this story approach rather than an adult is telling a story about a 12-year-old approach to the thing. So I thought that was pretty fun.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I mean, at first glance, like, I didn't really, the artwork wasn't my cup of tea, I guess, not to, it's art is subjective, but first glance, like, it's really my style of artwork. But again, it's like, as you go through it, I realize how much Kraft is illustrating Jordan's imagination through the artwork. And it kind of made more sense in that regard. It's like, it's actually really clever the way he's using artwork to kind of give you a look inside Jordan's mind, his imagination as a kid.
Yeah, I like that aspect of the art. And in a similar way, the art, just overall illustration of the book, wasn't like a plus for me in terms of this. Like when we're talking about House on the Lake, we're just like, oh my God, that's one of the big selling points. But it also doesn't detract from the book in any way to me, where I think if you had to say, oh, what's better? It's like, oh, well, the writing and storytelling is great, but he does both, right? So I think it's incredibly impressive to be able to do your own art in a way that doesn't detract from the story at all, and in some ways adds to it, like you're talking about with the imagination sequences. But overall, yeah, the art is pretty, it tells the story appropriately. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, cool. Let's talk about the last book in our list here, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff we saw in Goodreads. The last book on our list is a book that I picked. This is Fangs by Sara Anderson. The summary of this is Elsie, the vampire, is 300 years old, but in all that time, she's never met her match. This all changes one night in a bar when she meets Jimmy, a charming werewolf with a wry sense of humor and a fondness for running wild through the full moon. I guess let's start with you, Paul. What were your first thoughts of this book, or what was your first highlight, I guess?
I mean, visually, it's such a cute little book. You know what I mean? Like the size, the format, the illustration. I was sort of familiar with the creator, Sara Anderson's work before, but what I really liked was the way her artwork straddles the line between being cute and creepy. You know what I mean? It's like it's such deceptively simple comic book illustration where it's just like you look at it, it's like, oh, that's just, black and white artwork. It's pretty a nice line work. But then when you kind of look at the cartooning tricks, the facial expressions, it's really, really complex in a way. And it helps tell a story that's not necessarily a story itself. It's just a little glimpse of, their relationship. And so I think the artwork right away just makes it a very visually appealing book.
I feel like the same way about like it's incredibly like sparse, but also like not a single line's wasted. So it's super expressive, and somehow her faces make the comedy so much funnier. Where I don't know how she does it, but in the same way that a really talented comedic actor can deliver the identical line, but it's becomes uproariously funny instead of a chuckle. That's what her art does for me in all of her books.
Sure.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Like there's a subtlety, which is interesting because like if you look at Sara's Scribbles, which is the series that she's known for, it's a totally different art style, but you can see it's still there, right? Like her art style is still there. The type of humor is still there. The visual gags are still there. And yeah, this like I said in my notes, like, is this the most adorable book ever? And I mean that in like all levels of things, right? Like this book looks adorable. The story's adorable. Everything about like every time the couple has a good time, I feel really good inside. Like how has Sara Anderson taken a strip comic and made me fall in love with two characters without there really being a core central story other than them getting together and being cute? And it's like, God damn it. Is she one of the most talented comic creators of our time? I'm starting to think so.
How did this woman warm my cold dead heart is what I'm asking. Yeah. No, this is so good because it's so much of like the like acceptance and loving of each other's differences, and it's like so sweet and so monstrous at the same time. Like, it's so funny. But yeah, you're talking about the book itself being cute, like the velvet cover with the black trim on the pages and everything. I'm so glad they did that because the book as an object is just so nice and the hand feels so nice, but also it is very short in a way that I think I would have been upset if I paid $12 and then read it in 20 minutes. That I'm not at all when I have this beautiful book to put on my shelf, that it has this nice, it made it feel very like worth it for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I think what's really satisfying about the book as a physical object is that it's a book you can just pull off the shelf and kind of flip open to a random page because there's not like a true sort of narrative. It's like little slice of life, single page strips. You can kind of just like flip to a random page, chuckle at the joke, and like enjoy it. It's a book that you might sit down and read in 20 minutes, but you want to have within arm's reach when you need a little pick-me-up or you need something to giggle at or you want to show it to a friend. Like it's one of those books you really just kind of just want to have on your bookshelf at hand anytime you need it, right?
Yeah. I really appreciate comics like this, especially like physical editions, like you were saying, Paul, like the ability to just kind of open up to a random page. And if you've read it once, you know everything that's in there. So you get all the context in the moment, right? I feel the same way about this book, the way that I feel about Super Mutant Magic Academy as well as Nimona, where if I need to read something quick and just for a little fun, like those books are amazing to pick up off the shelf and just like take a look at a strip or two, right? Or like Nimona's got a couple page stories, but the idea is still there. It's quick, it's easy. You don't need to really know much other than these two are in love. And I think that's so fun. Like the jokes and the best part about it is like I love that Anderson doesn't spend time trying to over explain any of the supernatural stuff. Like the fact that werewolves and vampires are so prolific, the word that I'm looking for. They're so like regularly known by people that you don't have to explain anything. Like, and the jokes all work and land. Like, she's a vampire, he's a werewolf. Let's just run with those ideas. We don't have to go into anything. Right. I just love that so much context is built into the story. It makes for a really, really easy delivery.
Yeah, and we're saying that there's not really a central narrative, but there sort of is, because each page, each page is a standalone comic strip essentially, but you kind of see their relationship get deeper and more involved. And there's like one page where you can tell like they had a fight, and it kind of like tears your heart out. I was like, damn, really? Like, they look so perfect together. But every relationship, every couple will have those moments. And like the fact that Anderson was able to have just one page where it's like, yeah, they had a fight. They don't get into details, but it was bad, but they're able to patch it up. It kind of like made you really have a personal connection to these characters, like you said, but you don't get an over explanation or exposition of like who they really are. You just kind of see them through the relationship that they have with each other.
Yeah. Kate, I realized we started to abandon the highlight thing. I refuse. Kate, what's a highlight that you had on your side?
This book is everything Twilight should and could have been. Yes, that means Team Jacob. Obviously, have you met Edward? Obviously, Team Jacob. Like, this is everything that it's everything. That's just there. That's the point. That's little tiny bow.
Sure.
I love it so much in terms of like the hilarity and yet sweetness and closeness of the two monsters that are different types of monsters that are together. And we could have had this. We could have had this, Stephanie Meyer, and you're just going to have to live with that for the rest of your lives.
I mean, as Kate was reading this book, I think some of my favorite moments over the past week has been just her just randomly sending pictures of the book to our group chat that we have. Because like there's one that you sent that's like the guy is saying, the werewolf is like, we should have a baby. And the vampire woman just responds, for dinner? Like...
Breaking Dawn right there. That could have been great.
There's nothing better than explaining a comic over an audio medium, but I'm telling you guys, when you read that page, you will fall out of your chair laughing. That is how funny this book is. Like, I cannot express how funny this book it just is in general. Like, we've talked about it ad infinitum at this point, but like just picking up and just seeing a strip will literally like just brighten your day, because everything just works. Like the timing, the pacing, the way that things are drawn, the layout of every page is just fantastic. Like the subtle things, like that page that I just described. In that moment, the werewolf is sitting at a table with the blinds drawn over him so the sun's shining on him, and she's sitting across the table from him with the blinds closed so that the sun isn't hitting her. It's like all these little things, these little like understandings of who these characters are and that they have to adhere to these rules of being supernatural beasts click in every page, but nothing's explicitly said. It's all in the art itself, because the dialogue is so minimal in most of the pages. I really, really love that about this book, just how well formed it all feels.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess, I don't know, any last thoughts about this book before we wrap up here?
I mean, just everyone needs to go buy this book. Just do it. Just treat yourself. In a way that I don't feel like I can say that just as a blanket statement for New Kid or Nice House on a Lake, where I don't feel like you could hand that to literally anyone. I feel like Fangs is so good that in a very open way, you could pretty much give this to anyone who enjoys comics, and they as like a gift, and they would enjoy it and like it.
Totally.
Yeah, it definitely is a nice little change of pace from the heavy choices for the rest of the episode. It's definitely not a horror book, even though it's about vampires and werewolves. It's not dealing with sort of the emotions, the heavy emotions of racism as a kid. But so if you need something, a little pick me up, this is definitely the book to go for.
For sure.
Yeah, we did pick
a
good mix here.
Your days. Yeah. We proved that comics can be anything. I guess one of the things I want to call out before we wrap up here is I was just scrolling through the Goodreads thread, and a lot of the books that people said were their favorites from last year were some of my like highly rated books. Paul G said they were reading The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, Six Sidekicks of Trigger Keaton, Incredible Doom. Like, those are some of the best comics that came out and I read last year as well. I'm 100% on board with those. Canavan said they read Kent State last year. I also did. Probably like one of the best books I read, period, last year.
Absolutely.
And Aaron is rereading Hikaru no Go Volume 1, which, like, hell yeah. Like, maybe I should go reread Hikaru no Go. It's that good of a manga. I was saying this in the break. Like, I think Stephanie from our group also had like the best year ever in that she read like Sweet Tooth, Low, Rachel Rising, all of Invincible, The Prince and the Dressmaker. Like, holy shit, what like bangers after bangers of comics. So that was really impressive. Everybody in that thread read a lot of really good books, and I'm like adding to my list of things that I need to read, the ever-growing list. I don't know, Paul and Kate, did you guys get a chance to look at that, or were there any highlights that you saw that you're thinking about reading or rereading?
I mean, it reminded me of some of the stuff that I want to read. Like, I have never read Rachel Rising and want to get on that. But yeah, I love what a wide variety of stuff folks in our Goodreads group read. It is very helpful for finding new things to check out, especially as I'm like pretty reliant on digital and stuff right now, which is not always the best for browsing.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Still in my, because of being immune compromised, very much in the like lockdown state. And so doing a lot of like Hoopla and Comixology and stuff like that. So I have really appreciated the Goodreads group and this thread in particular for that kind of highlighting of lots of different stuff.
Yeah, I definitely need to make more of an effort to check the Goodreads stuff out because, yeah, like you said, Mike, the readers over there have impeccable taste in comics, and I need to just basically, I think I might just go to the library when we're done recording here and just find all these books, as many as I can, so I can just binge read all of them. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, we've set ourselves up for a good month in July, I think. I expect both of you, and honestly everyone listening to the show, to come back having read all of these books because they're amazing, and give us a book report, actually 5 pages, double spaced, so that I can give you feedback. I will be grading them and have them done to you within the week. So make sure to send those over to ircbpodcast@gmail.com. Next week, we do not have a show. As I said, it's the summer, baby. We're taking a month off. We've got all those Patreon shows that you're going to be getting access to. IRCB Movie Club #1, Mike and Paul read Doom Patrol Episode 1, Giant Days of Our Lives, A Better Batmobile. It's going to be an incredible summer for you listeners. I'm so excited for all of you to get to check out that stuff. And remember, if you want to listen to more after you finish those episodes, head over to patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Back us at the $5 tier, and you can get access to that and more. There's even more Patreon only stuff that's on there that we can't air because we just don't have enough time. There's just not enough time in July. And look forward to, after we get back, for Danny and Paloma to be joining the show. I'm really excited for the first couple of episodes that they have on, because the topics, I went a little bit crazy one night, and we've got some insane topics coming for after our summer break. Until then, you can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Paul at OhiPolly. You can follow me at Mike Rapin. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. I'm probably going to be really active, or more active, on our TikTok over the summer, so check that out in July.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for exclusive series like IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. You can join now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast.
And if you haven't already, please take a moment to rate and review our show. I think 5 stars is a fair rating. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, yes, they do have ratings, and wherever you listen to your podcast, because let's face it, we deserve it.
You can join the IRCB Discord communities, chat comics, and more. Plus, you can listen to our episodes live as we record every week. Check the link to our Discord in the show notes.
And podcasts grow best when they're spread by word of mouth. So why not tell your friends, your family, your local comic shop about I Read Comic Books? I'm sure they'll enjoy the show.
I handed out so many business cards when I was in New York, because that's what you do in New York, baby. Tell people about your podcast, your favorite comic book podcast. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music, and we love them to death because they make the best music in the universe. Zander's a very cool guy who edits our show and makes us all sound very good, we think. We can't thank him enough for his time and service. I want to say thank you to everyone listening. Thank you to all of you listening live. You are fantastic human beings. I want to say thank you to Kate and Paul as well, and everyone on Patreon for supporting us. We love you. We'll see you after the summer break. I hope you enjoy all the Patreon stuff we're going to be dropping on the feed. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.